Hi, welcome back to HowtoDandD. Yes, we're doing another live stream. Today is a book review. Now, I haven't done a book review for a while, and the book review I'm actually doing a live stream on is a topic I've wanted to talk about for quite a long time. But I thought it would be interesting, since this is going to take a little bit of time to go through all the books, and that is to do a poll during a live stream so that you can sort of answer a question. And I thought the most appropriate question to ask everybody, whether they have experience with these books or not, would be, do you think that kids will enjoy the Young Adventurer's Guide? So I'm going to pop that poll in, and then we are going to get started and do this, because there's quite a lot to cover. I'll make sure I've got this. Hello, how's it going, Swat, Cat, and hi, Scott. Right, do you think kids will enjoy the Young Adventurer's Guide books? And it's a question. Okay, do you think kids will... Oh, have I spelt that wrong? I have. I'll put that in correctly. Do you think kids will enjoy the Young Adventurer's Guide books? And I got yes, no. We need another option. So we will add another option here, if we can just get it to do it. Come on, add me another option. Yes, we need a not sure. And we need another option, and that is, we're going to put in some of them. Okay, so I think we have covered everything that anybody might need in terms of a poll. So we're going to put that up. And then while I'm talking about these books, you can kind of answer that poll if you feel inclined. And if you don't want to answer it, that's fine too. So my suggestion to you is get some food, some drink, get comfortable. We've got a lot to discuss today and not enough time to do it. So I am ready. If you're ready, let's make it happen, shall we? Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because I always do talk about Dungeons and Dragons, but today is special because we're going to do a book review. Not just one book review, we're going to do 5 books. Now, why am I trying to do all 5? Well, because I thought I could, and on this channel I do some really stupid things, and this is probably one of those times. So get ready, there is a lot to cover. We're going to talk about the amazing Young Adventurer's Guide for Dungeons and Dragons books, and I'm going to review all 5 of them. That's right, every single one of them. What a silly thing to do. Now, I've had these books for quite some time. I actually have all of the books, and I have found them most refreshing. Frankly, I am quite surprised by a book series like this. Now, I have a bunch of them here, and I will sort of show you them briefly as we go through here. But first, I thought what I would do is I would give you sort of like a summary of all of the books. So what you would normally get at the end of a review, I'm putting at the front of the review, so that if you don't have time and you need to get going, that's fine. That's all good with me. I don't mind. And then if you want to go into detail, I'm going to go into detail on each of the books after my summary. So let's go through this, shall we? So there are 5 books that cover everything about Dungeons and Dragons for kids or children. So they're hard-covered, digest-sized gold trim books. They have a stitched binding to make them last. These things can survive kids. They're written by Jim Zub and Andrew Wheeler, no relation to myself, and Stacey King. Now, Jim Zub has written a lot of popular comic books, and he is the lead writer, but all of the people involved are passionate, very passionate about Dungeons and Dragons, and that is probably why these stand out for me. They're intended for children ages 8 to 12 years of age, and you could say that they would be useful for new adult players as well. Whether you're a dungeon master or a player, you could actually say that some of the stuff is probably going to be really useful to them not just the kids. And there have been times, I know that there are people who have said, look, these books are so great that I want to keep them for myself. So how do we deal with that problem? Well, that's an interesting conundrum. I've looked at every review I could find on these books, and so I've got a fairly good idea of what's going on here, plus my own opinion after going through all the books. I've read them from the front cover to the very back. These books are designed for first-time Dungeons and Dragons experiences with kids and people who know absolutely nothing about the game. So don't expect rules in this book. None of the books have any kind of rules. No, it's not intended as a simplified game rules system with dice mechanics. Now, I know we all love dice, and you might be a bit confused by this. They are inspiration for your imagination. Okay? Kids love dice, but they don't need dice to play. And so therefore, they've got all the stuff that will inspire you. Now, you could argue, or some might be able to argue, that that what we have here in the form of these 5 books, these 5 books kind of represent like a diceless Dungeons and Dragons game that's hidden. It's hidden away, that most people won't be able to figure out. Now, I've talked about diceless Dungeons and Dragons in the past. A lot of people believe that it's not a game, and it doesn't exist at this present time, you would think, but maybe it does. What I will say is that I think that because there is actually a game in here, and it's not the game that adults will understand. There'll be a lot of experienced players who are adult, Dungeon Masters players who will not understand. But hidden in these 5 books, I suspect that only kids will actually notice this particular point, that they can actually play a game with these 5 books if they wanted to. In fact, they probably only need about 4 of these books and they would be perfectly fine. Now, the thing is, these books are intended and designed for kids, so it really doesn't matter what adults think, because the kids will use them like a game whether they are intended to be a game or not, or whether you think there is a hidden game in there or not. So that's how kids operate. So it doesn't matter what you think what Dungeons and Dragons is. Kids don't need hard, fast rules to play games. Adults need that often, but kids don't. It has lots of artwork. It's all completely new artwork. Not a single piece has been reproduced from any other book. It's all bright and colourful and illustration with lots of playful, cartoony action scenes. And I know some people are going to say, oh my God, action scenes, cartoony. What are you talking about? Well, look, that's for kids, right? You've got to understand it's designed for kids. It's not designed for adults. So they don't mind that kind of thing, okay? They don't mind that kind of artwork. The artwork is still very, very high quality. The whole series has an illustrated narrative perspective to it with a fantasy story focus, and it's designed to help develop a role-playing mindset. That's its whole focus. And because kids are so visual, having a lot of illustrations makes a lot of sense. And almost every page has got illustrations. If you find a page that doesn't have any kind of illustration and then text, then there's something strange going on. And there are a couple of pages like that, but it's very, very rare. Now, why is it done this way? It's done this way because that's how kids learn. They're visual learners quite often. They like to do stuff, and you can't just give them a wall of text. Adults can kind of handle that, but yeah. Now, the other thing is, when I say it helps develop a mindset, like a role-play mindset, kids don't really need help with that sort of thing. Kids are quite happy to get this done without being told or explained that sort of stuff. But the fact that it has that focus is still excellent. And I think this is one of the things that makes these books shine the most. Now, I am going to have a little bit of a whine here because I always do at some point, right? And that is, there is no index in any of the books, and some of the books could have done with an index. Maybe some of them could get away with it. I mean, there are some books in here, some books that really everything is in the contents page, and you would be able to find everything fairly easily. But there are some books which I kind of feel like an index would have made it a little bit easier for kids to find stuff. But here's the thing. In this case, I think Wizards of the Coast needs to be given a break, because how often do kids use an index? I'm not too sure they use an index that often. And because the books are quite small, they're not actually that thick, there's not a huge number of pages. You were talking, usually most of these books, because they're digest size, they might have like 100 pages in these books, or just over 100 pages. That's it. So maybe an index is not absolutely vital in this case. All the books are full of sample mini adventures. Like, seriously, like there are sample mini adventures or Dungeons and Dragons game encounters. Now, for those of you who are unaware, I have already presented on my channel many of the mini adventures and encounters on my channel from these books. I've been doing it for months. You may not have been aware of it. You've probably been finding them sitting within some of my live streams and videos, but more often you will have probably come across them in some of the polls that I've run. If you've come across a poll and it's like a little mini adventure or a little encounter where I'm asking you a question, they are often taken directly from these books. So that's what I mean by there are like little mini encounters. And they're often not just like a combat. They're about making decisions. Most of these books do a better job in some respects than the 3 core rule books for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Now, I'm not saying that there's everything you need. It's not like I'm saying these books has everything there is in the 5 core rule books for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. No, that's not what I'm saying. But with regard to the content that they go over, they often do a better job of explaining and illustrating the concept than those 5 core rule books. Now, that is a big thing to say about any kind of book series. And there are 5 of them. And I would say if you buy all 5 of them, you'd probably spend less money than the 5 core rule books. But then again, if you want the rules and the mechanics behind the game, it's a little bit different. Like I said, kids don't really need that sort of thing. Okay. So let's go through the first book. And I want to talk about Dungeons and Tombs. Dungeons and Tombs is a location book. It's very much focused on the location, the area that you're going to adventure. This is the book here, and it is full of things that I am quite surprised to see. I'm not going to open the book up just yet. I want to talk about the stuff first. I'm not going to show you every single page in all of these books. That'll come later. I will do a flip through and a very short edited video on all of the books at some stage, but today is the live stream, and so I want to focus on what I have sort of discovered about these things. So first off, there are 6 iconic locations highlighted in this book, okay? Dungeons and Tombs. That's Chult, which is a jungle area. You have the Iron Slag, which is basically like a fortress forge for fire giants. You have Ravenloft. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of Ravenloft. Yes, the Castle Ravenloft is in this thing. The Sea Ghost, which is like a pirate ship or a ghost ship. Undermountain, which is one of probably the most famous of all of the dungeons or dungeon locations that exist in Dungeons and Dragons ever. And it also includes the Temple of Elemental Evil. Again, we're going right back to the very origin of Dungeons and Dragons. These locations are in here. So what an adventuring party is in a Dungeons and Dragons story is explained for a novice. So if you weren't sure, like, what is an adventuring party in Dungeons and Dragons and the kind of stories that you would tell, they explain that to you. And they use very simple language. And I mean, most of us understand the concept of the Fellowship of the Ring or Lord of the Rings. That's like a really good example of what an adventuring party is kind of like. Although that particular party fell apart very quickly. We probably don't want to follow that particular route too often. So each dungeon setting has an overview of it. There's background lore on specific areas within that location, or should I say setting. There is important locations or areas. key regions, and a full page illustration of each of the locations, all 6 of them. You get a few spotlight locations that have story prompts, or in this case I would say adventure hooks, and a narrative encounter with possible choices that you can make, and they don't include any kind of answers or consequences to those choices or questions. They're just left open. They just ask the question. They just present some options and you choose. Although that's not the limitation there. You could do anything. A lot of the time they will say, like, what would you like to do? But they also give you a few possible ideas if you've got kids who are unsure what they would do. Most of the time you'll find that kids have a pretty good idea of what they want to do. These themed settings are like mini adventures in a skeletal form. I can only describe them as that. I can see people picking up this particular book and then deciding to go and grab the larger books that they are related to, like something like the Tomb of Annihilation, Curse of Strahd, stuff like that, Dungeon of the Mad Mage. That would be for adults. I don't know that kids will necessarily gravitate to the larger books because they are quite involved, but it's entirely possible that they may be interested in them as well. There are not enough locations and maps for my liking in this book. This is one of the things I don't like about it. And there's only two sample maps in here that doesn't feel like enough. Not for a Dungeons and Tombs or location book. There's monster information in quarter of the book, so quarter of this book is made up of monster information, which is good. It does what it needs to do well, okay? But it's in the wrong book. It should have been in the monster book. They've got 2 monster books, and they put it in this book. Now, I suspect because they couldn't fit them in the other 2 monster books, and they wanted to squeeze them into here. But I feel like they should have included more sample maps and more locations. They didn't have to just do 6. There's plenty of space for more. Now, one of the reasons maybe that they have done this is thinking that if they provide them with the locations and they also include monsters, it'll make it easier for them to build their dungeons, because you can build your dungeon or your tomb or your location around the monster, which is what a lot of us do as dungeon masters when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? So maybe that's what's going on there. There's advice on building your own dungeon with who created the location, the purpose of that dungeon or location, what is populating or what monsters or creatures live there, the ecology of that location, the kind of traps you might find, treasure. They talk about map making, and they give you a map legend key. There's a key in here that actually gives you what each of the symbols mean on a map. That's all defined in a conversational style or illustrated with pictures. So it's very, very simple and easy to understand. Exploration as part of the hero's or character's journey in a story is explained. So that is actually covered in this book. And there's a lot of questions they ask in this book around story and adventuring. It is a common theme within all of the books. And this does exactly the same sort of thing. The only difference is the questions they are asking are around the location you're exploring. Now, my summary on this book, what I think about this thing is that it's kind of a confusing mix of material. It's not fully realized, in my opinion. That makes this the weakest book in the series. I think all of the stuff on the locations is excellent, but I think the addition of the monsters in quarter of the book was a mistake. I think that's the one thing they probably should not have done. I think they should have included more maps in here to give people a sort of a better understanding of what locations, not just in picture form, look like, but what they look like on the inside, you know, the vast nature of them. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but for me, I think that although all the stuff in here is nice, I think some of it shouldn't have been in this book. It should have been in a different book. Still a very good book, though, in my opinion. And with regard to sort of like what sort of stuff, I mean, if you go online, you'll find a bunch of stuff in this on this book. But basically, I'm going to flip through. There's the map legend. I'm not going to show you every page. There's some monsters. We've got a monster in there. And we'll talk a bit more about monsters shortly. There's more of them. You get locations. There's Undermountain. And we start talking about sort of other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of different things. You can see that they do go into a lot of detail on these locations. Iron Slag, there we go. So that's the sort of thing we're looking at. That's that book. The weakest of all of them, I think, but still a pretty good book ultimately. Okay, what about the next one? Now, the next one is Monsters and Creatures, and I've always liked monsters. So it's not a hard sell for me to make a book. You can pretty much make anything, and I'm pretty happy with it if it's got monsters in it. So let's talk about this book. This book here, it's been out for a while. I will open it up in a second and show you a few pages, but let's talk about this thing. This book details different famous fantasy creatures by environment. Now you get things like the Beholders. I know you're wondering why such a high level monster for kids. I think part of the reason, and I'll explain why I think they have included such high level monsters. They've got Beholders in here. They've got dragons, they've got giants, they've got goblins, mind flayers, skeletons, unicorns, vampires, and much more. There's a lot of monsters in here. They've tried to squeeze as many monsters in here as they possibly could. You usually get a 2-page spread with each one of them. Now, you could have filled this book up with low-level monsters. But I think kids get excited about the big scary monsters too. And there are monsters or creatures in here that don't necessarily involve a fight. The unicorn is a good example. This is the sort of thing that kids would love. And frankly, I think I did a poll on the unicorn, probably one of the most popular polls I've ever put on my channel. And it had nothing to do with fighting. In fact, everybody's response generally was, no, I'm going to enjoy the moment. And I think players understand that concept in Dungeons & Dragons. I think kids will understand that as well. There's a general overview of the monster environments, such as like caverns, forests, mountains, moors, bogs, there's a boneyard, oceans, lakes, and then the open sky art. They're all provided. They give you enough information to describe what they're like. So it is not a lot of the book. And it is really simply like 1 page for each location, and then the monsters are then presented after that. Each monster has a comically accurate picture with special powers. There's lore on the monster. There's the Monster Lair. They talk about the Monster Lair. And advice on interacting with these monsters, including fighting the creature. A lot of the advice is not necessarily about fighting them. Sometimes it's something else, which is sadly lacking from the other books. And you could say, well, actually, the assumption is that people already know this sort of thing. But that is lacking from the 5 core rule books. And what this book has is the stuff that you hope YouTubers and the internet will provide you with. And I was shocked by some of the stuff I saw in here. I am surprised that we haven't seen something more like this. Now, The Monsters Know is a book that's out on Dungeons & Dragons 5e monsters and monster tactics. And there's actually a lot of monster tactics in here, not just for the Dungeon Master, but also for players and how they would respond. The monster books have a threat level for each creature in a graphic format. There's like a skull and a number inside the skull. And 1 is like a low level, and 5 is like the highest level. So it goes from 1 to 5 with a little skull. It's very, very graphic. It's very easy to understand. Okay, there's none of this challenge rating stuff or anything like that. It's a very general measure. You get sample narrative monster encounters, which I've already presented on my channel, with questions and choices to make. They are presented here in this book. Literally, you could pluck encounters out of this book and put them into your own game if you wanted to, even if you're not a kid. There are legendary monsters, giving like a short story on the major characters, like the Demigorgon. Yes, I know. The Demigorgon's in here. Duke Zolto, Strahd von Zarovich. That's right, Strahd's in here. And Tiamat. That's right. They're all included. They're in this book. Seriously, the Queen of Dragons is in this book. Why would it not be in this book? This particular character was included in the old cartoon, Dungeons and Dragons TV series cartoon. They came across the Queen of Dragons all the time, and so they have included it in this book as well. Using monsters to tell stories is expanded by sort of basic questions to help the process, to help you nut it out. Although I suspect that kids again will have no trouble with this sort of thing. This book could actually pass as a monster manual or monster book to hand to your players in your Dungeons and Dragons game. So if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, any version of Dungeons and Dragons, it could be basic Dungeons and Dragons right through to Dungeons and Dragons 5e, you could hand this book to your players, and it does not reveal any stat blocks because there's no stat blocks in this book whatsoever, and it would still be instructional. Seriously, this is a book where you could literally do something like that. So my summary on this book, in my opinion, this book does exactly what it should do, with expert design. Expert design. Look, the layout and formatting of all of the books is top notch. I cannot complain about any of it. So it's that well organized. Every single one of them is so well organized. Even the ones that I don't like that much compared to others have still got a fantastic formatting and layout to all of them. And this book is one of my absolute favorites in terms of what they have done. So I guess you're like, well, Fred, that's all very good, but like what is actually in this thing? There's a lot in this thing. This is the problem with these books, is there's so much in such a little book. So I will flick through very, very briefly. I'm not going to show you every single page. I'm just going to show you a sample. Beholders. You'll notice there's some do's and don'ts. You'll notice that the powers are illustrated. There's like this sort of chart format to it. There's probably as much lore, if not more lore, in this thing than some of the monster manual. This is what this book does. Yes, you get images of locations, pictures, full spread pictures. There's a lot of stuff in here that makes me envious. This is the sort of stuff we should have seen in a second book at some point for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, where you wanted like more monsters. So you can see it does a very, very good job of all of that. And all right, the Griffin. You'll notice that a lot of the pretty classic monsters are included in here. Not every single thing. This is a sample encounter. I actually put this up as a poll. This went up as a poll on my channel. And look, you don't have to worry about me not showing you everything, because eventually I will do a flip through of all of the books. And then the only page where there's kind of like a lot of writing is questions. Posing questions to you. Posing questions to players, posing questions to dungeon masters. These books are suitable for players and dungeon masters. They are suitable for kids, absolutely. They do everything that needs to be done in a specialized series like this. So that's Monsters and Creatures, but they have two monster books, would you believe it? The second one is Beasts and Behemoths. Now that came out because the series did so well that Jim Zub was able to commission and get another book made. That's this book here. Okay, Beasts and Behemoths. It is a monster book, very much like the Monsters and Creatures. There's a slightly different focus to this series. This book is dedicated to like the narrative fluff of beastly foes by size, going like from very, very small right up to gargantuan, the big monsters. So it's basing your monsters on size. It also talks about lycanthropes, your werewolves or were creatures, and your metallic dragons are in here as well. So each monster has a fun picture, just like the first one. There's a description of the creature. There are special powers and abilities detailed in here. The lore on the monster is talked about. You get the monster's lair. You get advice on interacting with the beasts and defeating them just as before. Same sort of layout. There's simple terminology that makes it easy for anyone to understand the different sizes and natures of these beasts. It's very easy. Narrative monster encounters, again, with unanswered questions or choices to make. They're sprinkled throughout this book, just as before. They include some legendary monsters, like things that you wouldn't expect, like a Sorcerer. That's right. A Sorcerer the Lich, Demi-Lich, he's in here. They talk about this character in quite a lot of detail. Lord Soth is in here. Queen Lulith. Is it Luha? I don't know that particular character that much. It's a Sphinx, as far as I remember. And then Bahamut. That's right. They're featured. They get 2-page spreads, and there's quite a bit of information squeezed in here. It's very stripped down, effective use of language. They don't have a lot of waste filler in here. They really get straight to the point. How to use your monsters to tell stories is suggested in this book, with basic questions to help people with the process. Doesn't this sound like a lot of stuff you would need to know if you were just playing the actual Dungeons & Dragons 5e game, or any game of Dungeons & Dragons? It's exactly that. There's not enough epic, gargantuan monsters in this book, in my opinion, to have behemoths in the title. If you're going to write behemoths and have the Tarrasque on it, you should have a lot of really big monsters. There are some in here, but I feel like there's not enough of them. I feel like the focus has been more on the beasts and less on the behemoths, in my opinion. The special features of the monsters are not detailed as well as I would like compared to the other monster book, Monsters and Creatures. I think they did a better job of talking about what the monsters' special features are and how their powers work and so forth, and what kind of magic they do. All that stuff was done better in the first book I talked about, which was Monsters and Creatures. This book, I think, spends a little less time doing that and doesn't do quite as good a job. My summary of this book, it's a very good book, but it's still the weakest of the 2 monster books that I think that they published. If I had a choice between this book or Monsters and Creatures, I think for me, Monsters and Creatures wins. I think that's my view on this particular book and how useful. Oh, sorry, I didn't do a quick flip through. For those of you who I know, there'll be somebody who'll want me to at least show you some pages in the book, right? So we'll do that. I will flip through briefly. As I said, I will do a complete flip through and show you every page in an edited video, not in a live stream. So this has got the kinds of things that some of the stuff is a bit, I was kind of surprised to see in a kid's book. They don't pull too many punches sometimes. Sometimes they really do just go for it. And I love that they do that. I think as kids, we like that sort of stuff. Maybe our parents don't, but kids do. They don't really mind, that things might be scary and gruesome. And therefore, if you put that into a book, it's all good. But they have very much tried to make this as easy for the parents to accept in the hands of their young kids. I mean, that's the... Now, here's a sample encounter with a monster, and I put this up as a poll, and you may have engaged in that poll. You might not remember it, or maybe you didn't, but it was up there on my channel at one point. You can see what they've done here. They've gone through and covered them in pretty much the same way as the other monsters. If you take this monster book and you take the Monsters and Creatures book, and then you include the Dungeons and Tombs book, you get a lot of monsters. You're pretty much covering most of your bases. The kids are going to have everything they really need. You won't need to worry about another release. I think that's part of the reason why they haven't done another release, because they didn't really need to. The do's and don'ts are there again, just as before. So yes, that there is still a very good book, just not as good as the Monsters and Creatures book. Okay, I need to drink some water. We've got 2 more books to go. And I have every intention of answering questions about this thing, so don't concern yourself if you think I'm going to just do this and then zap off. That won't be the case. So this here is Warriors and Weapons. This book here is like a player's handbook. It's like your player character building book, but it focuses on sort of like half of the character classes and sort of a couple of the other things that you don't find in the next one that I'll talk about. So Warriors and Weapons, this is a narrative guide to the martial character classes like the Barbarian, the Fighter, the Monk, the Paladin, the Ranger, and the Rogue. It gives you, I would say, pretty much what you need. The lore, the attributes behind a few different races are explained concisely with like Disney style pictures. Now in here you're going to find the human, the dwarf, the elf, the gnome, the half elf, the half orc, halflings, dragonborn, kenku, tabaxi, tieflings, and the turtle. That's right. So they've pretty much taken almost everything that was in the original Dungeons & Dragons 5e player handbook. All the races are talked about in here, plus a few extras they thought the kids would really enjoy. And being a bird, a cat, and a turtle is like probably pretty high up there. So I completely understand that. The different character classes that are covered, they cover the rudimentary lore behind them. They give you a few subclasses in terms of like explain what they're like. Probably I would say better in some respects than the player's handbook. Attributes and equipment. There's a lot of discussion about attributes, but certainly equipment plays a big part in this book. Something I was quite shocked to see, because usually you don't see that sort of thing. I mean, there is like an equipment and armor and weapons section in the player's handbook, but they do pay a lot of attention to that, and they give you some really good advice too. What else do we get in here? We get legendary characters are spotlighted with like a vibrant illustration and a summarized like personal history. Now, a lot of the characters you won't recognize because they have been created, but some of them have been pulled from existing Dungeons & Dragons novels or fiction, such as Wulfgar, the Warhammer, Brunar Battlehammer. You've got Wai Shu. I don't know who Wai Shu is. There's Red Clay. There's Minsk the Mighty. Yes, Minsk and Boo, exactly. And then we've got Shardy Freefoot. I don't know who Shardy Freefoot is. But these are characters that represent all of the martial classes that are talked about in this book. It's like, what would you inspire? Are you inspired to play this particular class? This is what you could wind up being in the future. This is what it's supposed to do for the kids. And I guess for anybody, really. And next, like questions related to what hero class race you might want to roleplay are offered. There's a lot of questions that help pull out and get you to understand what you might like to play as a class and a race. Some people struggle with this concept, right? But it doesn't just ask you questions, it provides a clever flowchart to support your choices. So you can see, you can go like, okay, I've answered this question. What would be, where would I go on the branch, on the tree, on the flow chart? Where's the best route to take based on my choice? It gives you that in this book. It does that with the other book as well. It is probably one of the most amazing things I have seen in a book for players, playing a character. I wish they had done this with the Player's Handbook for 5e. They haven't. It's in this book instead. There's a summarized description that goes into more fundamental aspects of characters, sometimes much better than the Player's Handbook, as I've said, around like character backgrounds, the names of a character, the height, weight, appearance, and like what they look like is very important. You're always going to get an illustration, okay? They talk about that, but they also show you. They do specifically talk, not necessarily about ideals, bonds, and personality, although personality is an aspect of this, but there's a strong focus on flaws. Flawed characters play a big part in this book. They talk about what sort of clothing you would wear, like literally what you would look like. What are you wearing? This is the sort of thing that kids think about. Trinkets are in there. Like one of the best things about Dungeons and Dragons 5e is the inclusion of trinkets, and they put it in here. Equipment, tools, armor, shields, weapons, and crazy combinations of all of those. I mean, how the heck they managed to get it all in here, I do not know, but they got a lot of it in here. There is a warning in this book, and I was really amused by this. I was not expecting to see this. A warning for heroes tangling with rust monsters. It sort of foreshadows the risks of exploring ruins and losing your metal gear. Like they actually educate and explain to the player or whoever was creating their character, like, rust monsters are a bad thing. You need to be very careful. And they explain how to deal with a rust monster. Like, the basics of that is actually included. It's the only monster that's included in here as part of this book. And it's featured here probably because it's the one monster you should know the most about, is the rust monster, right? If you're going to go exploring. Particularly if you're a martial character and you've probably got metal weapons and armor. There are illustrations of the packs, the different types of packs and kits with the contents, the details on it. It's all written out, but you also see all of the items illustrated. It's done much better than the Player's Handbook for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. It's fabulous. I mean, obviously they're not having to put in the core books are very dense. They've had space and time. They've laid these out so they make it easy to understand. Like key character and hero questions. Like all of the kind of key character and hero questions that you need to ask yourself when adventuring are partially explored. I wouldn't say that everything's in here, but there's enough explored and presented as a question for you to answer to really sort of help fill out the whole concept. Like, my summary of this book is exceptional character creation diagrams. Like, that flowchart just blows me away. The way it's been laid out, the way they present questions, the way they explain it. Okay, and also the concept behind hero story building advice. There's hero story building advice in here. Not just at the very beginning, but as you grow as a hero. All of the things that people consider important, it's all discussed in here. So it's an exceptional book. And I think that you'll find that it is one of the top priority books for kids. If you're going to buy the series, this is probably one of their go-tos. Particularly if they are into playing like a upfront or martial type of character. Although they might not know that just yet. So again, I know that there are people who want me to show rather than just talk about it. So I will show you some of the stuff in here, just like I did before. As again, I will do an edited video that flips through every single page in the future. I don't know when. This will take me some time. Okay, so here we get our introduction. Lots of really cool artwork that I'm sure the kids will enjoy. There's the dwarf. And look, it breaks it down in a very simple way. All the basics that you need here. These are questions. They only present maybe 4 or 5 questions, but the questions that they present are like the sort of questions you should be asking yourself anyway. So a lot of detail and space has been dedicated to the races, which I'm glad, because I think races are important in the game. You get here's one of the legendary characters that they talk about in here. Big pictures, big font, easy to read. Sorry if I've hit the mic. There we go. There's the monk. And it goes on like this I'm not going to show you every single one of them. I'm just going to show you what I think is important. This I've got to show you. This is the flow chart. This is how you make a decision about what you will pick. Like, what do you like doing the most? This is the sort of thing that we should see more of. Okay, flow charts. We've seen flow charts in adventures, but that's just like dumbfounds me just how good that is. We start talking about clothing, and there's only a brief description and discussion around clothing and what you wear. We've got a section on can I find some stuff on equipment here briefly? Yeah, so here's some swords. They don't just give you swords though. There are pole arms. Yeah, and a picture for every single one. One of the things that Jim had decided is that it sucked that you couldn't see a picture of every single thing that was included in the player's handbook. Special weapons, and they also talk about crazy combinations. Now, what would we be? You got to have armor, right? They talk about light, medium, heavy armor. There's a section on each one of them. This is the rust monster. Okay. Very, very important to know, right? If you are survival gear, like it is surprising how much. This is an example of some of the packs and kits. Like, there's a picture, and then they give you, and they have little arrows that sort of point to what is the water skin, what is the bedroll. So there's the bedroll, and you can see, maybe you can see it says bedroll. That's the bedroll. So they know exactly, because kids won't necessarily know what these things are. Okay, and then of course we get questions to ask yourself. So for me, this book is awesome. I think this is one of the standout books in the whole series. I love magic, and we have one more book to talk about. And this book is Wizards and Spells. And you probably already guessed that this particular book is covering the rest of the stuff that was not included in Warriors and Weapons. It's talking primarily about the stuff that we would like to see if we weren't a martial character. So a narrative guide again to spell casting character classes like the Bard, the Cleric, the Druid, your Sorcerer, your Warlock, and your Wizard. There is no Artificer. Don't ask me about the Artificer. The Artificer is not in here, okay? The Artificer, I believe, got created after these books were released anyway. And I don't know that necessarily that even if Jim Zub had access to using this, because this is all licensed by Wizards of the Coast, okay? This is a Dungeons & Dragons, official Dungeons & Dragons product. So they go over the 6 basic main classes for spell casting. The different classes cover the magical lore. There's a few different subclasses. They give you attributes and equipment again, much like the book I just talked about. They give you some legendary characters that are spotlighted to show what the masters have achieved. I mean, essentially, this is the master class of magic. Most of these characters I'm going to struggle pronouncing because I've never heard of them. And the reason I haven't heard of them is because they're completely new characters that may appear in future content or that the writers created. They just made them up. There's one that you will probably recognize. So there's Florzan Blank, Bell Vela, Dawn Pax, Damni Mahajan, Xanavir Clockguard, and then Mordenkainen. That's right, Mordenkainen is in this book. There are questions regarding what hero or heroine might best suit your role-playing style, making the selection of your class much easier. Again, supported by a flow chart to actually show you, based on the questions and how you answer them, where you should go and what you're more likely to be interested in, and break it down so you can pick what is going to work for you. Types of magic are briefly discussed and described, like the schools of magic. That's what it's talking about here. They go into, and there's enough detail to give you enough understanding in this book. They explain or give explanations on ritual spellcasting, scrolls, and spellcasting in general. There's a brief overview of a few classic cantrips. Now, when I say classic cantrips, it's not just cantrips. It goes from cantrips right through from level 1 to level 9 spells, and it includes tips on using those spells with a little spell effect illustration. Each spell, like there's a spell on one page. So you get the name of the spell, you get a picture, you get an explanation of how it works, and it also gives you some tips on using that spell. Things that you don't get in the player's handbook. Things that would be suitable for somebody who is new to the game. Okay, that's in this book. Now, not all of the advice and tips are that great. Some of the tips are surprisingly good. I was quite shocked. This book includes a lot of spells, but not every single spell. They've tried to include the ones that will capture the imagination of a child or a kid, rather than picking ones that you think they'll use the most. Not to saying that you won't find some of those in this book, because you certainly will. Okay, but there's a lot of stuff. They talk about wild magic, and it receives not just sort of a description. It gives you a story explanation and exploration of it, with many sort of really fun narrative surge effects. They give you examples of the surge effects that would occur with wild magic. I don't think it has every single one of them, but it has some of the best ones that you can possibly roll up in the 5e rules, right? That's in here. And of course, you could add more if you wanted to. So that is included in this book. I think it's one of the things that kids love the most. They like spells that have weird and funny and unusual effects. And this is why they've put that in this book, I think. There's an overview of the classic magic items with a short description and illustration. And this covers weapons, magic weapons, staffs, wands, armor, potions, rings, cloaks, and wondrous items. You kind of like get, I think it's like a 2-page spread for each of those areas. So magic items play a big part in this. I think this is where you find all the magic items, and the other book had all the sort of mundane equipment, right? Warriors and Weapons was about mundane equipment. This has got the magic stuff. There's a handful of legendary magic items also discussed in detail, like the Sun Sword from the Ravenloft campaign, the Staff of the Magi, and also the Wand of Wonder. So there's 3 legendary magic items in here. Now, my summary of this book: excellent layout and presentation. But I have to say, out of all of the books that I have seen, that this book is the one that shocked me the most. Because what sets this book apart from everything else is the spell advice. It makes it extra special. This book is really, really amazing. It's the kind of stuff, whether you realized it or not, that I have pinched from this book and put into some of my videos. Okay, so some of the spell advice in here and how to use those spells, it's extra exceptional special stuff. I cannot reinforce that more, just how good it is. Now again, I will do like a flip through of the entire book and show you absolutely everything in an edited video, but during a live stream that's not practical. Instead, it's about talking about what I think is great about these books. So I'm going to just show you a couple of pages to give you an idea. Here's like our introductory page. A lot of full page art if you hadn't figured it out. We've got the bard. Very much the same layout as the last book. We've got a cleric. We've got, what else? Here's a legendary character, which you probably never heard of, but I will show you. And then we get another, there's the Sorcerer. Always an illustration, always really good questions. And then, I mean, this character here, if you're a kid and you don't like this, I think most kids are going to love it. And then we have the chart. My understanding is that Jim Zub had people writing to him asking for the asking for the flow charts before he had actually printed the books. So this is a sample of what they've done with the spells. You'll notice that the text on the spell is quite minimal, but there's plenty of tips. There's usually at least 2 or 3 tips on using that spell. Web, mirror image. That's right, speak with dead. It's not been excluded. We're up to level 5 now. We're still going. Okay, animate objects, flame strike, that's in here. Prismatic spray. And we've got maze. Of course we've got maze. They couldn't have left that out. Did you know that there are 9th level spells in here? 9th level. Yes, meteor swarm, time stop. And yeah. That's sort of the spell section. And then we go into magic items. And I'm not going to show you every single one. I'll give you a legend. Here's the sun sword. And then we've got staff, the staffs. And then after that, like I said, there's wands and so forth. I'm not going to show you all of this sort of stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick what I think will stand out to you. Yep, got to include the bag of holding. And then, again, at the end of the book, pertinent questions to ask yourself. That's that book. This, out of the 2 books, for me, but then I like spell casting, is amazing. But I love both of them. I think both of them do a really good job to really explain to kids what they're getting themselves into and what they want. The question is not about whether it allows them to play Dungeons and Dragons 5e. It's not a question about whether adults think they are good books. It is about, do the kids, when they get hold of the book, like the book, enjoy the book? And I think they've done what they needed to do. Now, because Jim Zub is a comic book writer, and he's done so many comic books, I think that has actually made it much easier for him to understand and present these for children and kids to really sort of grasp onto. Now, I am hoping this was useful to you. I think this is a fantastic series. I love these books. I do have at least, I think there's one edited video that I do a flip through on one of the books. I can't remember which one it is. but you're welcome to go hunting on my channel if you like. If I remember what it is, I'll let you know. But look, if you enjoyed this, great. I actually have hundreds of videos that cover Dungeons and Dragons for players and Dungeon Masters, and you're welcome to go and check that out. 5e, Dungeons and Dragons in general, role-playing in general. I do a lot of that sort of stuff if you want to see more of my content. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon, the Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos. That's fine. Do the usual YouTube things like share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. I'm not gone. Q&A. Questions and answers time. Let's talk about these things. Look, I've been holding off on talking about these books for so long. And there's a really good reason for that. I didn't know what to do with them. And I knew I needed to dedicate a fair amount of time to them. But it's hard to do that when you're running a YouTube channel and you know that this is very much based on one particular group of people. I mean, it's targeted at children, right, from 8 to 12. So it's a very small part of the market for Dungeons and Dragons. But I still knew I need to talk about it at some point. It's just like how and when, okay? My suggestion to you is that you definitely want to consider them seriously. You really do want to consider them seriously. So what I'm going to do, hello Gonzo the Great. So Gonzo the Great is from the Dungeon class. He runs a YouTube channel. Buy a mug. All right, I'm going to just type in here, #question, just in case I miss anybody. I still have time before I need to get going. I am supposed to be doing a Dungeon Master Roundtable with a few people very shortly, and I still want to do a Q&A or at least respond to people. I'm going to leave that poll up right to the very end of the live stream. So if you want to put in your 2 cents on the poll, by all means do so, because I think it's a fun way of doing a live stream. I'm going to do more polls in my live streams if you hadn't figured it out. So we've got here, Scott is here. I think I've said hi already. Now, who's this? Is it Jonah? Jono Far. I'm screwing your name up big time. I'm going to struggle with that. I'm not too sure how to pronounce it. You'll have to help me if you're still here. I've been looking at these books on Amazon for ages, but haven't brought yet. Looking forward to the stream. Oh, good. I don't know. Has it given you enough information? How's it going, Ryan? So we've got Dungeon Masterpiece. Dungeon Masterpiece has a YouTube channel as well. Yes, he is part of the Dungeon Master Roundtable if you hadn't figured it out. So is Gonzo from Dungeon Class. But Dungeon Masterpiece, Ryan, he does a lot of stuff that's very out of the box. Can you give us an example of the mechanics? There are no mechanics in here. There are no mechanics in here. Kids don't need mechanics. That's the thing. I think a lot of the time people assume that there are mechanical aspects. I love a saying that I've seen floating around the internet, and that is, what we should never tell the dungeon masters or the players is that they don't need dice or rules. That they don't need dice and rules. Not everybody agrees with this. A lot of people consider that just storytelling, and that's not a game. But, you know, when you watch kids play, they don't need any of that. Adults need that. Adults can't get to actually, for an adult to sit down and play a game, they must have rules in place. Otherwise, it just feels like they've brought themselves down to the same level as a child, and that's embarrassing to an adult. But if you have rules and dice, that makes it easier for them to actually grasp onto. So there are no mechanics in the game, okay? It is all free flow and imagination. It's really about choices and consequences. These books are really about making a choice and then there's a consequence. And they do talk about the kinds of consequences that occur. That does actually happen in here. It may not be as obvious as you might think, but it's there. I need some more water before I go through this. I'm getting very dry. I've been talking for an hour, so I'm not surprised. Okay, so, hi Chris, how's it going? Chris says, I've looked through them thoroughly. Great for, yeah, I mean, trying to make it feel more real. I don't know that these books actually do that. What I think they do is they take you into the world. I think that's what we're trying to do, is trying to take them into the world. I think that's what these books do. But if you think that verisimilitude is what we're looking for, then fine. Mr. Cold Raven, really, what does Wizards of the Coast have against indexes? Yes, I think it's space, money, time. It frustrates me. I think indexes should be in books. You're a word nerd. Sorry for the shared sense of imagination. That's all right, no problems. It's a great Matt Colville word. Well, I mean, Matt Colville, it's not really his word. Matt Colville's actually not been around that long on YouTube. People have been talking about that for a long time, even before YouTube. So, not that I don't like Matt Colville's stuff, but people seem to assume that Matt Colville has coined everything, but he's not. He's just saying what things he think are important, and a lot of people are watching his stuff, and they're agreeing with him, and they like the way he presents stuff. But based on what he's saying, it sounds accurate. Yeah, okay, all right. Beholders are iconic, and I think that's one of the reasons why they went in here. But also, too, it's like a beach ball with eyes and tentacle eye stalks. Like, what kid isn't going to like that? We all like that. Why would we not like that for kids? It's you can't leave it out. Nice. I have new players that are always trying to get their mitts on the monster manual for the piece for the picks. Yeah. So what you could literally use the monster books that are in here in the series as a handout. You find a monster manual, and here's the book. It is better formatted than the monster manual, surprisingly. But then again, the monster manual has to include a stat block. The Dungeons & Dragons 5e monster manual has to include a stat block. These don't. There's no stat block. Right. Okay. So we've got some questions. I have. Oh gosh. I have Carmel. Sorry, I will have butchered your name. I'm actually struggling to pronounce things now because I've been talking for so long. Your question. From my view, these books could actually be quite useful for new adult players. That's exactly my view too. Not just the kids. What are your thoughts? Yes. I would say that Wizards and Spells is one of the books that I would certainly consider you want to present to new players, even if they're adults. It is so easy to read. And it's hard to stop reading it. Okay. And then Warriors and Weapons. I think that, again, very hard to stop reading the book. And so easy to understand. So yes, absolutely. The other books, yeah, but I think those two books, if you're a new player and you're an adult, are still going to be really useful to you. And one of the things about these books is you literally, you don't have to worry about them falling apart. They are not falling apart. They are not made like the core rule books. The Player's Handbook had so many problems with the binding. Even the Monster Manual had problems with the binding. I think it's only the Dungeon Master Guide did not fall apart, and that's because hardly anybody used it that much. The only time they opened that thing was to read the thing through once, and then to find the magic items when they needed them. And then occasionally they would use stuff in the Dungeon Master Guide, but very, very rarely. So that never fell apart. But the other two books did. None of these books are going to fall apart. They can get banged around. From all accounts, kids can handle these things, and they toss them like beach balls and like softballs and hard balls. They throw them around and they still survive, and they're designed to survive. Okay, so next. Where are we? Gorchin. Look, if I got your name wrong, I'm so sorry. Feels like cheating, even though there are no rules. Feels like cheating. I think the only time you might consider it cheating, if it's the Beasts and Behemoths, if you're talking about knowing about monsters before you see them, or monsters and creatures and dungeons and tombs. Yeah, there's a bit of metagame stuff in there. But I think, honestly, that there's less metagamey stuff in these things than there is in the core books. I mean, literally some of the character classes and their features and spells have built-in metagaming. Like, the mechanics have actually built metagaming into it. Yet these take it from the perspective that you're not a person looking in on the world, that you're actually in the world. Does that make sense? Okay. Fans should not need to make the indexes. That's right. So I have made a few indexes for books for Wizards of the Coast, and fans shouldn't have to be making indexes. You're absolutely right. I agree. I think that is frustrating to see that happen in anything. But you can kind of survive without an index with these books because it's only 100 pages. It's not 300 pages. If it's 300 pages and densely packed, it would be very, very hard to find stuff. Who doesn't love the eyeball monster? Exactly. Legend of Zelda was onto something. Legend of Zelda was onto something? The Beholder came before Zelda. Quite a long time before Zelda. The Legend of Zelda was based off original Dungeons and Dragons. But I think you're referring to the Legend of Zelda was made for kids and it included an eye monster in it, right? That's what you're trying to say. Yeah, I think that's what you're trying to say. Doesn't matter, you're good, just a username. Okay, cool. Right, so I've covered... Look, if there are... Oh, I almost got away. I got to the bottom of the chat and I thought, right, I can escape. But I'm staying for a little bit longer by the looks. Mr. Cold Raven, what do you got here? Then I would add the Dale Kingsmill, yep, and Matt Perkins to the they talk about a lot of that sort of stuff. But Matthew Perkins doesn't really like the use of making it real. The V word is thrown around quite a lot, and his perspective is actually very, very different, Matthew Perkins. I know I've talked with Matthew Perkins before about this in a video chat a couple of times when I was doing videos with him. And so we have talked about this sort of thing and his attitude and opinion of it. And he says it's fine in other medias and medium, but in Dungeons and Dragons, it's more about getting them sucked into the world rather than playing. When we talk about the verisimilitude, he says that applies more to a novel and a story rather than to Dungeons and Dragons, where it's an experience. Dungeons and Dragons it's not just storytelling, it's a story experience. You experience it. It's not like reading a book or watching a movie. okay, or somebody telling you a story. You are part of that story. It's like the never-ending story, but again, it's an experience. Those are the only people that I've ever heard say the word. There's a lot of people who say that and talk about it all the time. True. It just seems like 50% of the monsters are eyeball monsters in those games. Really? I never really played The Legend of Zelda. I can't play video games anymore. The result of doing so is the loss of my life. I wouldn't do anything else. And so you would never see this channel. It would have never existed. I would have never made a YouTube channel on Dungeons and Dragons and roleplay games. And although I talk pretty much about Dungeons and Dragons all the time, you would never have seen anything from me. I would have never done the Lost Mine of Phandelver series. I would have never made videos on all of the different core rules for 5e. I would never have done any of that if I played video games. So I can't play them. Okay, what do you got here? Mr. Cold Raven. I guess I'm not going anytime soon. Okay, about Matthew Perkins, I might have been confused. No, he does talk about it, but his view on it is very different. He did a video on it, yes. No, he does not favour it in Dungeons and Dragons. He's very, very specific about that. Now, whether you agree with Matthew or not, or whether you agree with me, it's like beside the point. Because, look, when you watch stuff on YouTube, you don't have to agree with anything. Do you know what I mean? There's a reason why I have insisted on trying to make the Dungeon Master Roundtable discussions with 4 panel members. Often we have different views. And yet we can talk to each other about those things and not suddenly get into a debate that becomes an argument and a fight. And too often on YouTube that happens. It is all right for us to have different opinions. And often our opinions and what we think are actually, what differences there exist are so insignificant they mean nothing. So yeah. Romero, how's it going? I have purchased the whole series and my kids love them. It's one of the things I kept saying is that it didn't matter what adults thought, kids love them and they use them over and over again. But I have given them to new adult players as well. It really seems to help any player decide which class and race they would like to play. Yes. That's what these books do. They really, look, they make it so much easier for them to understand these concepts. Like, do I want to cast spells? Do I want to be a magic spellcaster? And what type of spellcaster am I? What am I going to do? I don't want to cast spells. I want to get up in the front and I want to mix it up. Or I don't really want to be involved in spells. I want to do other things. I like bows and swords, or I just want to punch stuff, or headbutt it, or do fancy kicks because I want to be a monk. That's what these books do, and they do such a great job. Okay, Mr. Cold Raven, I do agree. That's what you do as a game master. Take what you like and leave the rest. Like a salad bar. Exactly. Yep. I'm a salad bar. I've talked about this with Eric from Fry Minis and a few other people on occasions who have decided they want to have an argument with me. Most of my videos consist of a list. It's a list of options, and you take what you want and you leave the rest. And I am what I would describe if I were to describe myself as a dungeon master, you could do this, but you don't have to. Rather than, you should do this, dungeon master. I don't really care about what you do at your table. And I don't really care what you like and what you don't like. That's up to you. You pick and choose what you want. So I think this is a good time to bring everything to an end since I don't see any more questions or any more comments to respond to. I'm going to end the poll And our poll ends with, do you think kids will enjoy the Young Adventurer's Guide books? And right now, 62% say yes, 5% say no. There are 24% are not sure, who will probably need to see a book flip through. And then there are 8% who think that some of the books will be interesting for the young kids. And I think that is where we will end that poll for today. Thank you to everybody who participated. It's been very, very useful, very interesting. Rubik, hello. Why not just get them kids... What? Why not just get them kids the player's handbook or a starter kit? Well, here's the thing. You could, but the reality is that they don't need the player's handbook or the starter kit. Do you know what I mean? Look, you could give these books to a 5-year-old. Now, they might not be able to read everything. Okay? They can't read everything in here, but they can understand what's going on from the pictures. So from 5, even when they can't read, they can literally understand what's going on with this because of the graphic nature of it. Literally, that's what's going on. So it's not about, is it useful for 8 to 12? I mean, is it useful for 5 and up? And because there's so many illustrations, this is the book that they're going to try to learn to read after they've got past Sally and Spot and Harry McCleary and whatever else they're reading. Okay, the really early books that you know, John, Sally, and all the rest. So yeah, but I think these books actually do a vastly better job of introducing them to Dungeons and Dragons and frankly to role playing. Not that kids really need an introduction to role playing. They know what they're doing. It's the adults that struggle with this sort of thing. Okay, so thank you to everybody who stuck around for my very long live stream. I know that there was a lot of material to cover, and yes, there will be edited versions of this on the books so you can see everything in them at some point. I don't know when that'll happen. It'll take me some time. Okay, but thank you to my patrons. Thank you to all of you for joining me. Now, wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the night, the afternoon, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Doug, kids don't generally kill monsters. They befriend them and make them their buddies. You will get murder hobos, but yeah. You'll find there are a lot of kids who are not into killing monsters.